Time's up, guy. We're out of here. This time I'm shutting you down for good.
We are talking CYST. This one is directed and co-written by Tyler Russell and stars Eva Habermann and George Hardy. Now let me ask you, are you a fan of cocktails? A delicious cocktail, a mix of 2 or more different flavours blended together to create a hybrid flavour. Well, if you like cocktails and you like horror movies, this may be the movie for you. Take one part The Thing, one part Little Shop of Horrors, mix them together and you have CYST. So the story here focuses on this kind of doctor's surgery which specialises in skin conditions such as sebaceous cysts and things like this. And we have a kind of a small cast of characters including the staff of this, this doctor's surgery and a couple of patients. And they are, the doctor in charge is kind of making this machine, trying to patent it as a kind of a new way to revolutionise skin treatments. It's kind of set in the 1960s, so it has that kind of a kooky 60s kind of feel to it. And we learn that this kind of machine that this doctor is creating isn't quite working to plan. It's kind of a little bit hit and miss. And he's also kind of inventing this serum which he's trying to use to create some type of medicine that will help with skin redevelopment. Well, that's kind of in the early stages. And through basically a lab accident, these two kind of new technologies end up creating a cyst monster, which kind of comes alive and essentially wants to attack anything that kind of is nearby and sort of assimilate it a la The Thing to create this kind of like ever kind of growing monster. Then this movie is pus-filled, it is gross out. We see, cysts getting burst and squirting into people's faces. So it's pretty gross out body horror. Let's discuss what I think works in this movie. So let's talk about tone first of all. This movie is not a serious movie by any stretch of the imagination. I use the kind of the example of Little Shop of Horrors, and it has that kind of like silly kind of tone, minus the music. There's no kind of music and musical numbers in this one. But it has that kind of weird tone, or if you're not familiar with Little Shop of Horrors, think maybe along the lines of Peter Jackson's kind of Brain Dead and that kind of thing. So a weird kind of zany environment, kind of plussed up by the kind of the 60s sort of aesthetic with kind of the funky kind of music and fashion and things like this. And you kind of get an idea of the tone here. But then you add the kind of the disgusting kind of body horror a la The Thing, and you maybe see where this movie is going. So I would say this movie definitely has a unique flavour. It has this kind of like that sort of that gross out body horror humour that I think some people will love, but with a kind of kooky kind of strangeness that is obviously not meant to be a realistic kind of movie or even particularly scary. And I was reminded of another movie called Spaceship, which is less well known, which is why I didn't really mention that one. But again, it has that kind of cheapness to it, to making it a pure schlocky B movie, but with certainly an element of fun. I really kind of enjoyed the gross out practical effects here. Even before we kind of get to our actual creature, we see some pretty disgusting like pustules getting popped and pus getting squirted into people's faces, in particular the kind of this long-suffering nurse who was kind of on our last day. That was ultimately our kind of our main character. So I think she's a great character. She's very likeable with her kind of role as kind of the leading character, and you feel she's probably the kind of the most realistic, I suppose, out of the kind of the characters that we have there. But everything is kind of played, as I say, tongue-in-cheek. Don't be expecting the too kind of realistic here. But that's the whole point of this film. I actually enjoyed the effects work here. All practical effects I thought was very well done. And again, it's kind of knowingly cheesy. If you're a fan of kind of schlock, I think you'll enjoy this movie. But if you're obviously a little bit squeamish, if you're not really keen on kind of like the grossed out kind of humour, then you might want to skip this one. But I kind of found it quite fun. But it's never like, even though the movie is relatively kind of gross at times, it kind of plays at this kind of, I said, this campy kind of vibe. So I think, to be honest with you, it's probably okay for most kind of horror fans, I think. You know, and only if you're very, very squeamish. Because the characters are so outlandish, they are quite kind of memorable. We have a kind of this weird, kind of zany, almost mad scientist-like doctor here, who is quite a lot of fun in his own right. But even kind of down to some of the kind of the people in the waiting room, there's some quite good sort of comedic timings there, and you know, use of sort of comedy and kind of like the gross-out kind of special effects make for some kind of fun set pieces. The movie is relatively short, so it's actually kind of quite well paced, I have to say. So it is a kind of a little bit of fun if you kind of like that kind of sort of thing. Okay, so let's talk about what doesn't work. The movie is not much in regards to kind of narrative. Let's just be honest here. The movie is narratively a little bit lacking. It really is more or less kind of one location with a brief kind of a couple of scenes in a kind of a diner. But it ends up being just kind of people trapped in a office with a monster. There's not really much to it plot-wise, so don't be expecting anything kind of too deep here. I feel the kind of like the cartoonish characters may be a little bit kind of too much for some people, because they just, to me especially, for example, the Doctor, as fun and memorable as it makes them, it's hard to kind of buy into them when we have these cartoony characters in that kind of, to this degree. Now in something like Little Shop of Horrors, well, that's kind of a musical, I don't know, for me that kind of is you can't, you know, you're not taking it as a kind of a story that you're not necessarily following as much, so you can get away with it a little bit more. But here, where it's not a musical, it's played as a kind of a horror comedy, to me at least, the characters just seemed a little bit too kind of cartoony at times, and it's kind of really hard to, you know, follow a character. Our nurse character is probably the most well-rounded, but some of the other characters, they just seem like disposable caricatures to a certain degree. Effects-wise, it's fun, but I think it actually could have gone a little bit further, if I'm completely honest. Like I said, the kind of the effects here are all practical. They do look quite cheap at times, I will say. You know, it's kind of, it almost looks like paper mache, particularly kind of towards the end. But I actually think they could have lent into it a little bit more and have it a little bit more gory in actual fact, because the stuff that we see is kind of gross, but not necessarily gory. And I maybe would have liked it if it had lent into the kind of the gore a bit more to try and make it kind of truly icky. The whole point of this film is kind of like this weird body horror, but it strangely feels, you know, a little bit more too goofy and less kind of gross. It is gross, but not to the degree that I think it could have been. Overall, it's a kind of a fun little diversion. It's kind of, if you're a fan of kind of practical effects, weird monster movies, and a kind of campy kind of like 60s kind of tone, then I think this movie is a bit of fun. It's certainly a bit of fun. I don't think it's necessarily memorable, but I still kind of enjoyed it and had a little bit of fun with it. I'll give it a 6 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.